A major woke trope is ascribing racial intent, motivation, and racism to all disputes as the primary lens that things are viewed through. So if two people are in dispute, there is always this assumption that it's a power struggle between racial elements instead of looking at how there could be very many variables at play. For instance, if we're viewing a conflict, often if a person is hostile, the other person will get more defensive and hostile, and the two of them are reacting to what? The aggressiveness and the hostility. They're not often reacting to anything other than personality and energy, and yet it's like we forget this and we always have to ascribe that it's secretly racism because we read their minds of these people. But if you're always ascribing that, then it seems as though your own perception of reality is so overly racist, because the person that's always seeing racism in fights is racist because they can't view that things could be hostile for reasons that have nothing to do with race, but actual humans reacting to characteristics and energy and all kinds of things. So that's why it's a trope, it's an assumption that's reductive, and it ruins the complexity of human disputes. And it's not to say that even when there are things that are racial, there's such a level of mind reading and ascribing intent that how can we really determine what's what? The way that you can really determine racism is if somebody uses racial slurs and does that. But right now we just assume it just by the nature of if there's a white woman, often called a Karen, in a conflict with a black person, it's just an automatic assumption that's ascribed. And so that's why we're going to talk about that particular trope in relation to The Office of Historical Corrections by Daniel Evans. Now, this is a book of short stories with a novella. And underlying all of these stories is the idea, usually of white privilege, and often another sub-idea of that, which is white people are rich and just they can't see past their privilege, and there's always a almost default elite wealth, ascribing that to the white characters. For instance, in the very first story, a black woman is at a hospital and she says, "Could I please just treat me like you would the average white woman here?" So again, that's the assumption that because she's black, she won't get as good of health care. But the main story that really is kind of really bringing the woke tropes to a head is the story of a white girl that's wearing a Confederate flag bikini. And her boyfriend posts the picture of her in the bikini and tags her on Facebook. And her hallmate, her black hallmate in her college dorm, reposts that picture and says, "This is my hallmate on vacation," and then does a face that's like cringe, or a face that's like, uh-oh. And then from there, then people are reacting to, oh, she's wearing that Confederate bikini. And then that girl, when she returns to college, she escalates the fight by sliding under the door of the black hallmate that same picture and saying, "Hope you enjoyed your vacation," or something. So then that is what escalates them to then being in the administrative office to discuss how this is a hate crime. And then it has they have a cartoonish libertarian guy that's like, "I'm here, you have the right to express yourself," and kind of just very much to me, the thing about the story is it just kind of tapers off, like it doesn't really lead to, we don't have very much reflection or opinions or emotions of the girl in the Confederate bikini or the hallmate. It's just very much like two very one-dimensional people almost having a fight in that kind of ideological script. So we do get a sense that the girl with the Confederate bikini has resentment toward black people because her mom and her black best friend from childhood, both of their moms got cancer, and her mom, the white mom, died, and the black mom didn't. But to me, that's like, honestly, I just saw that as the author of this book thinking, well, I'm doing such a good job of being able to humanize a horrible white person. Like, that's kind of what I think she's doing. For me, the story is almost playing out in an allegorical way. Like, it has the like complete, the white Confederate character is clueless, ignorant, like just doesn't seem to have any emotional depth. And then the character that is upset we don't get very much about her. All we get about them is she's black and she's the victim. She's white and she's privileged and evil. And then we get some interspersed backstory that doesn't really add to the white girl or the black. We don't really, and when we get into the university, I thought, oh, we're really going to get into these. And then it's just kind of, the story tapers off, and there's not anything, it's just like eating flour instead of eating a loaf of bread. Like, there's nothing binding the ingredients or there's not a conclusion, like the bread isn't baked. It's relying on woke tropes more than creating a beginning, middle, end story. And it's kind of like flash fiction more than a short story. And so for me, it just relied on woke tropes, whereas I was curious, what would make a very compelling story that would really ring true is if a girl sees another girl's bikini photo, and we don't get to know what the hallmate's body type is. We get an assumption that the white girl, since she's wearing a bikini, must be thin and have an attractive body. But a girl reacting to another girl's bikini, what if she actually, underlying it all, was reacting out of jealousy of the girl's body, but she knew, she was thrilled actually that she was wearing, it was a Confederate bikini, because then she can have the perfect mask of virtue and being offended by that flag, and then be able to put down that girl. Because we always have it be like, again, the woke trope is everything is always racially as the underlying. But often with women and their fights, what's underlying women's fights are jealousy. And women, because we're reduced to our looks, one of the main things that we're not allowed to admit that we're having that fight, but that's often what's going on. So what if that story was somebody that was, if she looked deep down, she resented the girl's attractive body and the bikini, but she had a perfect way of insulting her without looking like the bad guy or without looking like a jealous person. And then she was able to do that. And then the girl in this bikini, what if she even saw through that and mentioned it? I mean, of course that would be a little too true, and a little bit like people just hate to have things be, like they hate to think of themselves as things as being that superficial, but that people really are having these deep belief-oriented political fights. But the truth is that's what people are always fighting about, that kind of thing, but then always finding a good mask to justify it. And that would have made an interesting story, because it would have gotten at how we use race as a way of being able to have a moral upper hand. And then, I mean, that would have made such a compelling story because there just would have been layers. And it would have been so, it would have, like, that kind of jealousy is just, people would do anything to not have that shown. But in a book, when we're really getting into dimensional shadow, that would have been interesting. And so anyway, that's one story. And then then there's another story to the title of this, The Office of Historical Corrections. Now that is a novella, and that story is diving into basically fact-checking kind of racial histories, and it has the same woke trope of the default, every conflict is racial, and so that conflict is a black woman is working for this kind of fact-checking arm of the government and evaluating the certain historical facts, and it's you expect it to have a huge. All it builds up into is it has a white supremacist guy who secretly has black in his family, and hates himself, and then it's just kind of navigating this fact checker looking into this family and who's hiding their blackness. And again, it's carrying a lot of it almost like it almost seems to right around the conflict, because it seems like there could have been it's just kind of assuming a lot of self-hate, and perhaps there is that. Perhaps there is a lot of that internalized racism, internalized misogyny. We always hear these terms, but it's almost like it doesn't explore it beyond the statement, the stated kind of allegorical character that almost seems to represent an idea rather than being a human being navigating it. And that's the thing about woke tropes, is they reduce the complexity of humans to ideological representations of ideas. And sometimes that's useful in a story, like Animal Farm does that with all the animals representing belief systems, and Brave New World did that with having, like, one character represents Leninism, and kind of do a lot of books do that, but it's kind of almost, it's obvious they're doing that, whereas in these are supposed to be literary fiction, and it falls prey to the assumptions that actually limit it from us kind of getting deep with the characters. Because like I said, mostly this felt very surfacey, but pretending it was deeper than it was, and then it felt like flash fiction with a lot of assumptions. But then the character, when she just let her main character have depth and have the shadow and admit to kind of getting off on adultery, that story was the best in that. It's the second story, because that story I felt present with the main character, and I felt as though I wasn't just being delivered a sermon. And while I think that she made great efforts to not sermonize, it's just there because she's operating under assumptions and woke tropes. Because that story with the Confederate flag bikini, where she thinks she's humanizing the white girl by, like, the two mothers, one black, one white, dying, like, actually that was just a tangential context that felt over-explained and not relevant to the central conflict. It could have really had that college conflict brought out. So anyway, but if, read this book, read the short stories in it, and let me know what you think. If you think that the woke tropes are actually very effective, then let me know. I think that they make this book reductive and a little disappointing.